Is evolution compatible with Christianity? Yes. Yes, it is. This is going to be a short video. Not quite that short, in that I want to touch on a couple of things. It'll still be a short video, but I want to speak a little bit about why so many people assume that evolution and Christianity might not be compatible. And so, for the first 5 minutes, that's what I'll be talking about this strange assumption and where it comes from. For the second 5 minutes, I'll be speaking about a couple of issues between Christianity and evolution that we probably need to pay attention to and may need to iron out a little bit. And so that's what this video is going to be about. It's the first in a 3-part series on Christianity and evolution, Christianity and Darwinism. And the other 2, I hope, will be pretty interesting. One, we're going to look at what does it mean for the doctrine of original sin, and that's always going to be spicy. Then in the third one, I'm going to suggest that only Christians, and maybe really good atheists like Nietzsche, can be really thorough Darwinists. That's going to be spicy. If you're interested in not missing out on those videos, please do subscribe to this channel. But this video, 2 sections, 2 short sections. First section, why do people assume there's a problem between evolution and Christianity? And in the second section, while there's no problem, while it's entirely compatible, there's a couple of little issues we just want to be attentive to. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the video. People tend to think that there's a savage incompatibility between Christianity and evolution, or even Christianity and Darwinism, because they assume that what the Bible set out to do was to provide a blow-by-blow, fly-on-the-wall account of the origins of the universe and the origins of the human species. And of course, this is absolutely and utterly and obviously wrong. It would be like saying, let me use a crazy example, but you'll see where I'm going with this. Let's say in 1,000 years, people did an exhaustive study of the ancient Near East and worked out that there was never a man who had 2 sons. No man ever in the entire history of Israel ever had 2 sons. Therefore, when Jesus told the story of the prodigal son, he must have been lying. He was making it up. Jesus' story of the prodigal son exploded. Jesus, a fraud. Jesus and history are incompatible. Therefore, we must reject Jesus' story of the prodigal son because a man never had 2 sons in the entire history of ancient Israel. You see where I'm going with this. Jesus is not telling us about a man who had 2 sons, because the really important part is that there was a man who had 2 sons. No, the story of the prodigal son is about who God is. It's about God's love. It's about God's relationship with those who transgress. It's about God's embrace of the outsider. Jesus is telling us about all these things, and the historical facticity or not of a man having 2 sons, that really is not the point. Now, the idea that the book of Genesis wasn't actually about God or God's will for creation, or about human relationship with God and how problems can kick into that human relationship, but was in fact an account of a blow-by-blow, fly-in-the-wall account of the origin of species, is equally ridiculous as suggesting that Jesus was just fixated on the historical account of a man who had 2 sons. No, texts before the modern world in general are understood and have a different self-understanding. Their goal on the whole is to try and relate the person to the truth, is to try and expose us to the truth and help shape us through our practice of reading or practice of hearing this story. Or it's about how to interpret the now in relation to events which we can speak about in the past. Or it's about forming together as a community. And so I'm thinking about the Iliad, or I'm thinking about the history of the Roman emperors, but particularly in the Christian world. Think of artistic depictions of something like the Annunciation, where you'd see the angel Gabriel coming in and bringing a lily. What? There's no a lily? Did he bring a lily? No, it's not about the lily. It's trying to communicate something about what's happening, why it's happening, and who this person is. so too the book of Genesis. So too the book of Genesis is about things that are far more than facts. Think of Plato's allegory of the cave. The modern world sees the purpose of texts as to laboriously document the shadows and measure the shadows, and to say that this shadow is 5 centimeters, and behold, it is a fact that this shadow is this, and so we can sort of work on this and build on this, and that's science. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. That would never really have dawned on people before the modern world, because what's real and what's true and what's beautiful and what's just and what's good and what's important can't be reducible to the shadows. The shadows are cool and they can put on a great show, and we can maybe delight in the shadows, but ultimately it's not all that significant. Now again, in the modern world we've changed. In the modern world we can go, look, the dust on Mars, how amazing it is. It is red and dusty, and that really floats our boat. Before modern times, they'd go, dust is fine, but what is it? Is it an analogy for, or is it an image for the brevity of human life? Is redness a sign that the material of which we are is ultimately blood-filled, and therefore we're ultimately violent? No, it's dust, it's red dust, and it's far away. They really wouldn't understand why we had become so fixated on what they would consider to be banal things. And so too with texts. We fixate on banal things to try and establish the facticity of certain things, and not all of these facts are relevant, important, or interesting. How we can build a better world is really interesting. Yes, I'm sure it's interesting if a multi-billionaire can fly really high up into the air and then come really back down, and that's magic. But how we can be transformed such that we can be free to live a good and beautiful and just life, that we can be the kind of planet that God wills us to be, a planet marked by goodness and peace and justice. These are the things which interest people in the past and tend to interest us less now. So anyway, this is just a brief articulation of why people in the modern world go, no, there's a massive dichotomy between evolution and Christianity, because Genesis is fixated upon here's how the universe is created, and here's how species are made. And of course it's not about that. And the idea that it is about that comes from a modern heresy, a modern turn which fixates on the shadows on the wall in Plato's cave, rather than being interested in the real. So that's one of the reasons why it's problematic. Nonetheless, there are some tensions. There are some questions to be posed of Christian theology by evolutionary perspectives, and for the next 5 minutes, the final 5 minutes of this video, I'm going to speak about them and speak about the fact that they need to be ironed out a little bit. And that will hopefully set up 2 other short videos that I'm going to do on this topic in this series of Christianity and evolution, which will come in a few days' time, and then a few days after that. There is no problem between Christianity and the theory of evolution on the basis of the fact that they're both competing understandings of how species originated, because they're not. Then is it just all perfectly plain sailing? No, of course not. Everything that happens, and the more we know about things in the world from a scientific perspective, that's really good, and we've got to shape and imagine and think about our model of God and our understanding of the world in relation to these developments, which are good and which can help us to understand and know better. And so there are nonetheless questions which evolution poses to Christianity and say, you should account for this, because this is a real issue for you. And so I'm going to look at one of those now. The main one focuses on, and we'll come to this in the next video, it requires a whole video because it's so important, and that's going to be about if we have evolved the way Darwin said we've evolved, and I believe we have evolved the way Darwin said we've evolved, and I believe that even neo-Darwinists like Richard Dawkins are fairly right about, they may their slider for natural selection versus randomness might be a little bit askew, but hey, that's not, I'm no expert in that, but in general, I'm 100% on board for it. That poses big questions about why would God create species that are so prone to being selfish or to being replication machines. So that requires an entire video, and so we're going to look at that next. But the one I want to look at now is that if humans are so important in creation, which Christians and Muslims and Jews believe us to be, we're not dichotomously opposed to the rest of creation. We're part of the rest of creation, but we're like the chorus of a song or the particularly important movement in a symphony. We're something distinct within creation, because in us creation can say yes to God. In us creation can give full explicit thanks to God. With us creation can enter into a relationship with God that without us is impossible. So we're important from the Abrahamic religion's perspective, and yet evolution seems to suggest that that's not the case. If we're so important to creation, then why does God not make us in the way that it's in Genesis? That creation, us, no messing around, you're central to creation, you're important to this creation thing, and so there's you. The point that God wants to get to is 10 feet. But instead of God going, and we're at 10 feet, God starts back and rolls the ball because we evolve. The idea that God wants a particular pinprick in time, let's say 325 or 2021, and that's the time. Freeze it, hold it there. That's the person that I want to be in relationship to. That's the person that I want to say, you can accept union with me or reject union with me. I don't think that's the case. I think God's relationship with humanity is a relationship with humanity which is not reducible to the attributes that we associate with humanity at any particular point in time. Humanity is far more and is far broader than any one particular iteration of humanity at a particular point in the timeline. So let's say prior to the evolution of humanity as we are now, there are humanoid forms who are in relationship with God, who can mourn the dead, and who can dream, and who can imagine the world as more than material, and who can relate to God in ways which are affirming of the plan for creation. Humanity is not reducible to a particular iteration, and Christians have always known this. There's an important passage, and this is where I want to leave you with. There's an important passage in Augustine's City of God, where Augustine is talking about what he considers non-human creatures like him and like all the people that he's met, which would have a head here, torso here, 2 legs, 2 arms, walking around. That's the most common form of being human. But the other forms of being human, Augustine is asking, are they in the lineage of Adam, and are they worthy of dignity and grace and in relationship with God? Now, who's he imagining here? Well, he's imagining whole various races of people that he has heard about and believes to be real, but he's never actually met. So, for example, they believed in they won't call monopods. What were they called? I don't know. But they basically their torso became one big foot, one big leg, and they hopped around. Other people whose head was in the middle of their chest, and so they had no head on their torso, their head was in the middle of their chest. And then other people like co-joined twins that are like that Augustine is is citing as being forms of humanity which aren't typical. And Augustine's key point is, and this is something that we need to really take on board, today and for always, is that the dignity of these people rests not on attributes they have. They don't need to have 2 legs. These dudes have just got one big torso descending from their head, and that's them, and they hop around. They don't need to have any particular attributes, because their dignity rests in the fact that God loves them. Therefore, they can never earn it, they can never lose it. God's love for them is the basis for the dignity. The goodness and that which is worthy of reverence is God, and God's love basks on their bodies. God's love abides and rests on them, and therefore they have a dignity which is not reducible to attributes. That's important for us today, of course, because as soon as you link dignity or worth to attributes, horrors await, because it will only be a certain amount of time before someone says, this person doesn't have that attribute, that person doesn't have that attribute. Maybe that attribute is having this race, this skull shape, this skin color, and they don't have that attribute, therefore they're not fully human. Horrors lurk whenever human dignity is linked to particular attributes. And Augustine's model, and the basic model we have throughout all of Christianity, loses that. It punts that, because the dignity of a person rests on God's love for them, not particular attributes they have. So therefore, the dignity of the human person, even when they were far hairier than me, even when their foreheads were far even bigger than my forehead, and they have a dignity, and they have a worth, and they have a relationship with God which is delightful to God. And in a million years' time, the forms of human being in the world will be in relationship to God and will be loved by God, and their way of thinking and their brains and their isness and who they are will be distinct from mine, but they are part of that humanity, made in the image and likeness of God, made in the image and likeness of He, Jesus Christ, who was to come, and made for this relationship. So that question, that problem, that little obstacle, what's God doing? Twiddling God's thumbs and a sort of just, playing cards with the other members of the Trinity while waiting for humanity to reach its perfect state. Prior to the ancient world, humanity is loved by God in relationship with God, and forms of even less hairy than me, even smaller browed than me, forms of humanity will be loved by God in the future. So that's all to say. 1, Christianity and evolution, no problem whatsoever. 2, few wrinkles that we need to think about, few things that we need to reflect on, but reflecting on them is fruitful and profitable, and can help us understand the now better, and help us understand what we're called to by God in and as Jesus Christ better. Subscribe. Why? Subscribe because in a few days' time, we're going to have another video on Christianity and evolution, and it's going to focus on more difficult questions and more testing questions, and we're going to focus on topics like original sin, tough topics. And then finally, there's going to be an incendiary little video, which is going to suggest and claim, and most Christians and all non-Christians will hate this, it's going to suggest that only Christians can be really hardcore followers of Darwin. And Nietzsche can't do. But yeah, so subscribe so you don't miss them. And thanks so much for your time. If you have thoughts and comments, and of course you have thoughts and comments, you're bright, clever people that watch these videos. Leave some comments below. Let me know where I'm going wrong, if there's anywhere I'm going right. And look forward to seeing you next week.
Keep dancing with the devil, waiting, there's a lot of